If I have to guess, I would say that you're probably as tired as I am with all the discussions around nutrition and what is the best strategy and how we should eat, how we should think about it, what is the best type of diet. Because, it seems like we have evidence to support every little thing around diet, whether it's plant-based versus animal-based, whether it's keto versus high carb. Everyone is so entrenched in their own field and in their own corner that it seems very hard to have some reasonable perspective into nutrition. And I will definitely not want to add to the noise. And quite honestly, what I want to do is to provide you a simple framework that you should use as a founder and executive to understand whether or not to understand whether or not what you are about to eat or drink can be helpful or harmful to you. That's what I want to do today. Let's call it the 3 levels that diet influences our health. Welcome to another episode of the Prime Human podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Miguel Damas, medical doctor based in Portugal, founder of Prime Human Performance and working with health optimization for more than a decade. And over the last more than 10 years now, as you can imagine, I've spent quite a fair amount talking to my founders and executives about diet, what the science says, what is the best option, build the best strategy for them. And I always use the same framework to try to see whether or not a diet will be helpful or harmful, or what is the best options for that specific person. I don't want to, it's not breaking news. We are all different. So, we should all react differently to the same things, or at least that's a possibility. And we need to make sure that that is core part of whatever discussion we have around nutrition and any strategy that we use to optimize our nutrition can help us. So what are these 3 levels? The first one is how much pressure and load the diet will cause into ourselves as individuals. The second is the macronutrient structure of the diet and the impact it has in our performance and health. And third is the micronutrient content on the diet and how much value, nutritionally speaking, how much value it will be adding. The core principle now on this framework, on this 3-level framework, is that we need to go on a step-by-step approach. And we need to make sure that each level is considered and it's taken into consideration when we are trying to use nutrition for our benefit, health, performance, whatever you want to call it, or whatever your goal is. And I want to share that with you. So we'll go step 1 or level 1, level 2, and level 3. What is level 1? It's probably the most disregarded aspect of diet and how it impacts our health. And I really want to make sure that you understand this. Usually, there's this saying that we are what we eat. And although it points us in the right direction, it doesn't necessarily shares the whole thing, because we are not what we eat. Actually, we are what we digest, absorb, and how much of that we can use to our own benefit, and that is not causing harm. That should be the sentence. Not just we are what we eat, but rather what we do with the food that we eat and what is the impact that it's causing. So in that impact, there are 3 sections: inflammation, oxidation, and allostatic load. Well, I'll translate that into English. So what is inflammation? The first big area. Inflammation is just the level of activation of our immune cells, of our immune system, of our defense system that anything causes. Putting that in the perspective of diet is whether or not certain food items will create an immune reaction. We don't need to have like a big allergic reaction that is quite life-threatening, caused by peanuts or shellfish, any of those most common triggers. It's about the more ongoing, chronic, silent, systemic reaction that the food can play a big part. And it stems from the fact that 70% of all our defense capabilities are located and stationed in the gut. And it's quite clever, because the gut lining is the biggest point of contact that we have with the outside world. If we would spread it completely, it would be roughly a tennis court in terms of area. And you can see it's a big, big, big area. So we station most of our defenses there to make sure that we are scanning everything that's coming in and making sure that we don't allow anything that will be harmful in, right? Makes perfect sense. It's the first line of defense, okay? Now, when we eat something that our system perceives as not being ideal, as not being the best thing for us, either because it's really a toxic stuff or our system, our individual immune system, genetic system looks at it and saying, well, actually, I don't like you. I don't think you're good for us. So if you're not good, you're bad. And if you're bad, we need to fight you. And that creates like a tiny immune reaction against it. No problem until now. The issue is that if your diet contains multiple triggers, tiny triggers of these reactions, or you're eating very frequently the same item, the level of defense activation and the level of prepared attack keeps building up and building up and building up so much that eventually the information starts to spread around in our system and creates what's called a chronic systemic inflammation, a low grade, very silent-ish defense reaction that is not enough to create like a big catastrophic damage like a war would cause, but it's there lingering in the background, just creating havoc and messing around with a lot of things. And this systemic reaction, this systemic status, this chronic immune reaction and activation threatens everything that we should want for ourselves. It's a core, at least one of the core processes that is behind most of the chronic diseases, including cancer, including neurological diseases, autoimmune conditions, metabolic conditions. All of that will have a very big core inflammation aspect to it. But also, crucial to founders and executives is anything that requires brain performance, talking about decision-making, mood stability, focus, resilience, creativity, thinking outside the box, making sure that we can keep ongoing. Burnout. Having chronic inflammation will just make these more likely and will just make sure that we are not thriving. Anything that we eat, if it causes inflammation, is causing too much damage, no matter how good it is on level 2 or level 3. We must make sure that it's not creating more damage than good. Now, speaking about damage, we can move into section number 2, which is oxidation. What is oxidation? You can see oxidation as rust. Okay. And it is like something that keeps destroying the structures silently, just like rust does. And there's 2 big ways that we can have oxidation in our system. One, we have it by breathing, literally by breathing. The process of using oxygen in our breathing processes will create something that's called reactive oxygen species, which is a highly reactive, highly damaging particle that will just bounce around, and depending on where it hits, it will cause damage. But there's not that much that we can do around it. The more oxygen we use, the more reactive oxygen species we'll have. But that's on the side, let's say. It's not really important for our topic of discussion today. But the other is if we are having oxidated, damaged, rusted foods coming in. And that is a big part, especially because some types of fat are highly sensitive to oxidation. You may have tasted it when they go rancid. Usually, vegetable oils, polyunsaturated fats from vegetable sources with high levels of omega-6, they are really, really sensitive to light, to oxygen, but crucially, to temperature, to high temperatures, which mean that anything that contains these vegetable oils, high in omega-6, high in linoleic acid, like safflower oil, sunflower oil, canola oil, that are ubiquitous in high ultra-processed foods, they will be oxidized. That's almost certainty that it is the case. And when we get oxidized fats, that already damaged fats, rusted materials into our system, and we'll be using them in the production of our cells, our cell membranes, we'll be using in our system. I mean, you can see that we are already starting at a disadvantage. And there are 2 areas in our body that will be suffering massively the impact of oxidation and oxidized fats. One is our brain. Given that 70% of our brain is fat, you can see that having damaged fats coming in will be massively detrimental to our brain function. And in fact, it kind of destroys the structure of the brain. It blocks or changes the signaling around neurotransmitters, particularly dopamine and serotonin, and will also cause inflammation by itself because it's a damaged product that will be understood to be a damaged product. So therefore, it will create some sort of immune reaction. These will, again, cause brain fog, anxiety, drop in energy, drop in focus or drop in executive function. The other area will be mitochondria. So what are mitochondria? Mitochondria are these powerhouses of our system. Okay? They literally convert food into energy. That's where we use oxygen in the process. And because we use oxygen there in the process, we are already producing reactive oxygen species there. We are already kind of creating damage, which we'll then need to accommodate. And that's what we can do. But if on top of that, we are consuming damaged fats, we are consuming oxidized goods, we are consuming already rusted materials, our mitochondria cannot perform. And then if they cannot perform, what will happen is that our ability to produce energy, to have sustainable sources of energy will go down. The downstream effect is that everything in our body will suffer. Our brain will suffer, our muscles will suffer. Everywhere we produce energy and require energy will suffer. And then the higher demands of energy we'll have, the more we'll suffer and feel it because we will not be having enough energy being produced. So between inflammation and oxidation, you have two big areas of impact that food can have that is crucial and we cannot overlook it. We must be sure that we are addressing them with any strategic nutritional plan that we can implement to maximize health and performance, which then leads me to the third and final section in level 1, which is something that's called allostatic load. What is allostatic load? Allostatic load is basically the wear and tear that we put our system in. Just imagine that you have your engine redlining. The more you have just maxing out, the more damage it will create. And there is so much that we can handle. After a certain threshold of damaged and pushing our system, having too much load and demanding too much for our system, we'll start breaking apart. Inflammation and oxidation are big parts of this load. Food is a big part of this load. Everything you eat, if it is creating more pressure into our system than getting us tools and ways to recover and to mitigate the damage that we have as high performance, if you want, that food is doing no good there. Every time you think about food, every time you think about what should you eat to maximize health and performance, you need to take into consideration this. Is it creating more load, more pressure, or is just relieving it? There's nothing in between. Anything that we eat will either help us or harm us. There's no zero in this game. It's either helping or harming. And this discussion, I don't see that frequently because any other topic that we'll get into, but any other nuance must be first addressed by this. It doesn't really matter if you have the most perfect plant or beef or carb that grew in the Himalayas and are perfect and massaged by it doesn't really care if it's causing immune reactions into your system, is oxidized, is putting too much pressure. If you address this, you will be making the best possible nutrition decision that you can make. Full stop. And now we move into level 2. Level 2 is all about macronutrients, the percentage of macronutrients that we should have, the amounts that we should have. And that's where most of the discussion around nutrition is usually based on. So before we move into the details, let's first address what are macronutrients. Macronutrients are the three big pieces in our diet puzzle, if you want. It's protein, fats, and carbs. Those are the three main macronutrients. What they do, in a simple way, you can see that protein is the infrastructure combined with HR department of our body. It is the backbone of our cells, our muscles, our organs. It's also the backbone of brain communication with neurotransmitters. And it's also what we use to grow, to repair, replenish, and to recover. Then we have fats. Fats are more, let's say, long-term assets and the backbone of some of our operations. It's the most stable source of energy that we can have. It's the most highly dense source of energy, but it also provides, as I mentioned, 70% of the structure of our brain. Most of our cell membranes are made from fat. Also, fat is the first piece that we use to produce steroid hormones like cortisol, testosterone, estrogen, and also vitamin D. And then we have carbs, which are more sort of short-term investments and cash flow that we use. It's basically fast-acting energy that we need when we are under pressure and under stress, but it's not that wise to rely too much on it because it's not clean, not sustainable, and it's really a unstructured way to keep functioning. So this is simply put the three macronutrients and how they relate to each other. When we are trying to assess what is the best dietary nutritional strategy, as founders and executives, we want just one simple thing. We want diet to support our goals and be to help us. Full stop. I mean, narrowing it to you has let me go back. As a founder, you need to ensure that your diet is supporting your goals, that the macronutrients that you have, all these level 1, is there to support your goals. So why do you need each of the macronutrients? Let's start with protein. Why do you need protein? Basically, two main reasons. First one is to improve brain performance, specifically to ensure that you have enough neurotransmitters so that your cells can talk to each other in a perfect way. We use the building blocks of protein called amino acids to create neurotransmitters, to produce neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine. You probably have heard about them. It's just if you do not have enough amino acids, your brain cells will not be good into communicating, into talking. It's like if you would want to make a presentation, to make a pitch, and you cannot use words or you don't have enough letters in your arsenal to really share your message. It would be really tough to make the best possible presentation, would it? So that's exactly how our brain feels when we don't have enough neurotransmitters. Studies in the armed forces show that increased protein intake reduces the negative cognitive impact that stress has in our body. Just put that in perspective. By having enough protein, by ensuring that your brain has enough tools to speak, by itself will reduce the impact, the cognitive impact that stress can have. Then the second big reason is also around brain, but it's more around brain energy stability. Having protein, especially for breakfast, will enhance your mood stability, energy stability, and brain function. A paper published in 2003 showed that a high protein diet, and by high they meant 1.6 grams of protein per kilo per day, led to a more stable blood sugar and enhanced executive performance, mood stability throughout the day. These are two big arguments for making sure that we have enough protein in our system. Now, on the protein discussion, there's this big ongoing worldwide argument on plant-based versus animal-based eating or protein sources. And I want to give you my 2 cents. Simply put, from a performance perspective, there's no way around it. Animal-based protein is much better than plant-based protein. Full stop. And there is one specific argument that makes all this discussion super clear. When you have your protein from an animal, whether it's meat, whether it's dairy, whether it's whey protein, you will have access to the full scope of the essential amino acids that you need to function. Essential amino acids mean that these are the ones that we cannot produce. There are a bunch that we can produce from essential amino acids, but we need to have the essential amino acids in our diet. And it's quite hard and complex. Not necessarily hard, but it's quite complex to have all the essential amino acids from plant-based sources. You need to be really careful around mixing different sources of protein to make sure that you have it if you have any animal, any meat, fish, dairy, you will have all the essential amino acids. Full stop. And that's as much as I'll go into it. From a performance perspective, the best source of protein will be animal-based protein. Now you can start to understand where the levels come in, because if the source of protein, the animal source of protein, will create inflammation and oxidation and too much damage, is not a good one, even if theoretically it will be. What I mean is, for example, having poor quality protein, having poor quality meat, like cured meats, like mass-produced beef, like unhealthy porks, will create high levels of inflammation and oxidation, and therefore will not be good for you, even if they will have all the amino acids that you need. That's all the going step-by-step discussion that I think is crucial. Now, moving into the second macronutrient, fat. And again, just to reiterate, I'm talking about healthy fats, not oxidized, not ultra-processed foods. It's about healthy fats. Why do we need healthy fats? When, again, structure of our brain, 70% of the dry weight of our brain is cholesterol, is fat. So if you don't have enough fat, you can imagine how much your brain will suffer. But also hormonal health, you can look all the steroid pathways. They all start with cholesterol before they are derived to progesterone, to cortisol, to DHEA, to testosterone, to estrogens. It starts with cholesterol. If you don't have any cholesterol, or if you don't have enough cholesterol, if you don't have enough fat, then the downstream effect will be significant, especially when we are putting our system into too much pressure and we require a lot of cortisol and a lot of testosterone to keep on going. It helps to reduce burnout. High omega-3 diet has been shown to reduce the symptoms of burnout. That's why omega-3 is one of the core supplements that all my clients take, because amongst other reasons, it will help to prevent and mitigate burnout symptoms. And then the fourth is something that cannot be overlooked, but you will only feel it if you feel it, which is the stability in your brain function and your performance without the need to stop and snack. When I went through my personal journey of weight loss and I discovered the low carb, high fat, or I tried it, one of the things that I noticed is that my performance was not dependent on how much I would eat or if I would eat. If I would be having a back-to-back day, like a 10-hour day that I would not have time to eat, I didn't find that my performance dropped at the end of the day. If I could eat, I would eat. But this flexibility freed so much time, so much possibilities, because all of a sudden I was not looking into my calendar and making sure that I would stop and eat. And for someone that has a very flexible schedule, this is actually life-changing. You stop being concerned if you'll be eating or not, and whether or not if you feel that your performance will be dropping or not. Having enough and high fats in our system is crucial. But again, I need to underline that the quality is key. Bad diet, bad fats are really, really bad. Oxidized, trans fats, ultra-processed fat, they are really, really bad. Therefore, if you want to increase the fat content in your diet, you should do it through healthy sources. First, not damaged, no processed foods, no trans fats, no vegetable oils that were highly refined. You need to completely remove them. So then you go for avocados, extra virgin olive oil, especially if it is Portuguese, which is the best olive oil in the world. You have coconut oil, extra virgin or cold pressed coconut oil. Then you have grass-fed, grass-finished beef and pork. You have free-range chicken. You have free-range chicken eggs. You have wild-caught fatty fish. Those are the best sources of fat. And then finally, we come to the third macronutrient, which is carbs. And I'll answer a few questions around it. First question is, do we need carbs? Yes. Second question, do we need to eat them? Not necessarily. As I mentioned, we can produce carbs from protein and fat through the process of gluconeogenesis. So in theory, if we are not under too much stress, too much pressure, too much perceived survival situations, we should be able to produce enough carbs to keep on going. And we do not need too much carbs, especially in the morning. Now, which then leads me to the third question. Do we need them for performance? And the answer is yes and no. As founders and as executives, we are not sprint athletes. We are not sprint athletes. We are actually endurance athletes that are required to sprint from time to time. If we start sprinting too often, something is off. We are endurance. We are going for the long run. And therefore, our system should be prepared in that perspective. So when we look into the endurance athlete, endurance sports science, we can learn a lot from it. A few months ago, a paper was published that I consider a landmark paper, one of those that will have a before and after. The authors include absolute incredible people. Tim Noakes, Jeff Volek, Dominic D'Agostino, amongst others. And these three are absolutely brilliant minds studying for quite a long time the impact that fat and carbs can have into performance. The reason why I think this is such a landmark study is that they showed that carbs will enhance performance, not by feeding muscle effort, but by maintaining blood sugar stable and avoiding exercise-induced hypoglycemia. In other words, drop in blood sugar because of exercise. The key aspect is that when sugar drops, it sends a message to the brain, or the brain perceives it as a big threat because it may run out of fuel and we may be risking brain damage because we don't have enough carbs in our blood, which then makes it turn off the effort and increase fatigue levels. One of the conclusions of their publication is that the evidence over the last 100 years tells us that 15 to 30 grams of carbohydrates per hour is enough to maintain blood sugar, which is enough to maintain performance. And we do not need any more carbs to keep the engine running if we are able to convert fat into energy. So, long story short, do we need carbs for performance? Yes, but just a tiny amount to make sure that the blood sugar maintains stable. Now, when we think about our ability to produce sugar, if we are not demanding too much of it, we may be able to produce enough sugar to keep it stable and therefore avoid fatigue and brain performance drop. Which then leads to a fourth question. What is the negative side of having high carbs in diet? Because yes, okay, it doesn't boost performance, but does it cause any problem? And the answer is yes. For starters, if you have a high carb breakfast compared to a high protein breakfast, the high carb breakfast will lead to more mood instability, higher levels of anxiety, and messed up energy throughout the day. It just creates a day that will have up and down blood sugar because you had a spike in the morning, which then leads to the development of a status that's called glycemic hypervariability, which really means that your sugar is up and down, up and down, up and down. That status, even if the numbers are okay, your blood sugar is okay, your HbA1c is okay, that status, that up and down, that instability of sugar in the blood will lead to blood-brain barrier disruption, vascular disruption, brain function disruption, which then will lead to drop in brain performance and cognitive performance, just by having the instability, even if everything seems okay. The last question, the fifth question, are there any benefits from having carbs in the diet? And the answer is yes, especially if you are under a lot of pressure. Having stable sugar that will not cause up and down will decrease the need for cortisol and will stabilize levels of cortisol as well. But different to what you may have heard, you should be having your carbs late in the day for dinner, not in the morning. I know it's way different from what most people say, but the fact is that when you have healthy carbs at night, the ones that will not spike too much sugar will get you a very stable sugar level. That has been shown to increase sleep quality for two different reasons. First, it will increase the concentration of tryptophan in the blood that will lead to increased levels of serotonin, which then will lead to increased levels of melatonin, which then will lead to better sleep. And second, it will prevent you from having a crush in sugar midnight and then a need to increase cortisol just to account for it. So it will lead to better sleep and more restful sleep. And this marks the end of level 2. So level 1, we assess how much load and pressure and damage the food can have, either by inflammation, oxidation, or the allostatic load that will create. Second level is what is the impact that the micronutrients will have and whether or not you should have protein, fat, or carbs. And then the level 3, the last level, is around the micronutrients. Is how much value there is in the food and how much it will impact our system. And I just want to share a couple of points here. First is that nutritional density matters. Nutritional density matters, and it matters really when we are trying to maximize our health and performance. In 2006, there was a paper published by Bruce Ames on his triage theory. In this theory, it postulates basically that if you don't have enough raw materials to account for our short-term needs and for our short-term survival needs, then we will not be allocating that into higher needs. So according to him, cell damage, DNA damage, which are then the onset of chronic disease, cancer, etc., are caused to some extent due to the lack of nutrition that we have in our system. is just caused by the lack of nutrients that we have, which is refreshing. I find it refreshing, at least, because it gives us a framework to understand why we need to look into diet into more than just protein, carbs, and fats. We need to really look into what is the nutritional value that it has, because our cells need all the things that they can have to perform. And this is obviously when we have any need or any desire to perform. If we are just waiting for life to happen, fine. But if you really want to perform, if you really want to have the best possible functioning system for the short term and long term, we need to have enough nutrition. And that's level 3. We need to make sure that everything that we eat is packed with as much nutrition. We're having as much nutrition as we can have, real nutrients for each thing that we have. Clear example that it affects our performance, how much nutrition we have, are studies made in prison and youth detention centers trying to assess the difference in behavior following different types of diet and following different types of supplementation. Impact is shocking. The impact of nutrition in behavior is shocking. And this data is old. It has more than 40 years. In 82, 83, there were a series of papers published on juvenile detention centers in LA that showed that removing junk food from diet reduced violent incidents in about 25%. Again, removing junk food, which has a lot of damaging agents of level 1, is probably not balanced in level 2, and it has a lot or doesn't have any proper nutrition in level 3, reduced violent incidents by 25%. That was the first that led to a series of studies that showed basically the same thing. In 2002, there was a randomized controlled trial done in UK prisons that showed that taking a multivitamin, a very basic multivitamin, just accounting for the RDAs, led to the same level of reduction of violent behavior, 25%. Then in 2024, a systemic review on the evidence of nutrition and supplementation, what impact it had in behavior change in prisons and juvenile detention centers. I mean, the numbers are unreal. Let me read a few conclusions from some of the studies included in the systemic review. Regular fatty fish consumption improved heart rate and heart rate variability, which are a marker for autonomous nervous system balance and overall more hormonal and stress balance, reduced anxiety, and improved executive functions. A reduction of 26% was seen when taken vitamin and mineral fatty acid supplements. Those taking supplements were seen to experience an 83% decrease in non-violent rule violations. Supplements covering 100% of RDA was found to reduce real violations and compared to placebo group, and the reduction was around 40%. So what is the take-home message? Now, these are the 3 levels that you should always consider when thinking about diet and thinking about optimizing your diet. Level 1, the damage that it causes and reaction that it causes to each individual. Second, how much macronutrient it has and whether or not it has enough protein, fat, and if it has too much carbs. And third, what is the micronutrient content, and whether or not it has high nutritional value, because it will change behavior, it will change health, it will increase chances of you thriving. I sincerely hope that it brought you more clarity, more structure, and a simple way to look into diet. First, remove completely the crap from diets. If it is damaged, if it causes any immune and inflammation, remove it. Second, make sure you have enough protein, enough fat, and just enough carbs to thrive. Third, maximize your nutrition value. Make sure that it has enough micronutrients to make sure that you are thriving. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope to see you in the next one. This episode was intended only for educational purpose, and you should not see it in whatsoever as medical advice. So before you change anything with your protocols and treatments, please consult with your physician.